Imagine standing in the car park of the world's most expensive sports stadium, holding a sign in the summer heat asking the most powerful sporting organization on earth for one simple thing: safety. Not a cheaper ticket, not a better seat, not a refund, just the basic, fundamental assurance that you could walk into that building, do your job, serve your food, pour your drinks, cheer for the beautiful game, and go home to your family at the end of the night. That was what 2,000 workers at SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles were asking for. And when they did not get the answer they needed, they did something that sent a shockwave through football at the worst possible moment. They voted to strike. 96% in favor. The cooks and servers and bartenders and dishwashers who were supposed to welcome the world to the 2026 FIFA World Cup, the people whose hands would feed 5 million visitors, looked at the situation surrounding this tournament and said they could not guarantee they would show up. And behind that vote was a fear unlike anything any World Cup had ever produced before. A fear that was already sending thousands of fans around the world in the same direction, away from the tournament entirely. Stay with us, because what is happening around this World Cup, in the places most people are not looking, reveals a human story of extraordinary depth. And by the end of this video, you will understand why FIFA found itself facing a crisis it had no script for and no easy way out of. Let us start with the number that crystallized everything: 17,000. That is how many fans had already canceled their World Cup tickets and requested refunds weeks before the opening match, according to reports emerging from fan communities and supporter networks across multiple continents. Not resold, not transferred, canceled. People who had bought tickets in good faith, who had made plans, who had been part of football's great summer pilgrimage, choosing to walk away rather than travel to a tournament that felt, in ways they struggled to articulate, no longer safe to attend. The reason they gave was not the ticket prices, though those had been ruinous. It was not the visa complications, though those had been agonizing. It was something more immediate, more visceral, more human than any of those things. It was the fear of what might be waiting for them inside the stadium. To understand that fear, you need to know what was happening at SoFi Stadium, because what began as a labor dispute between 2,000 hospitality workers and a stadium management company became, in the weeks leading up to the World Cup, one of the most significant stories football had ever produced. The workers represented by the union Unite Here Local 11, the cooks, the servers, the bartenders, the dishwashers, the people who make a match day function, were operating without a labor contract as the tournament approached. Their demands included better pay and improved job security, but at the very top of their list, above all else, was one non-negotiable. They wanted a guarantee that immigration enforcement agents would have no role at World Cup matches, no presence inside the stadium, no activity on the grounds, no activity that would place a worker or a fan in the position of being approached, questioned, or detained while attending or working at a football match. Their co-president, Kurt Peterson, put it in language that nobody who heard it could easily forget. He asked what good the World Cup was for Los Angeles if workers could not earn enough to pay their rent and had to choose between showing up for their shift and being detained. He said if the union was forced to strike, the premium suites that FIFA was charging $100,000 for, would have nothing inside them but bottled water and snacks. The image that created, the most expensive seats in the history of a World Cup, empty and unstaffed, was both darkly comic and deeply serious, because it captured in a single picture everything that had gone wrong around this tournament. A stadium worker named Yolanda Fierro stood outside SoFi Stadium at a protest and said something that deserved to be heard around the world. She said that fans from around the world would come expecting an unforgettable experience and that her colleagues took pride in making that happen. But she said no worker should have to come to work fearing separation from their family. And she asked FIFA directly. She asked them not to share their personal information with enforcement agencies. Another worker, a cook named Isaac Martinez, stood at a protest outside the same venue and said 4 words that the whole tournament could hear. ICE should have no role in these games. Behind those words was a community of real people, people who had built their lives in Los Angeles, who had worked at that stadium for years, who were proud of what they did, and who were now being asked to welcome the world to a celebration of football in an environment where they themselves did not feel safe. FIFA, for its part, maintained its public position of confidence. Their president, when asked about the presence of immigration enforcement at football venues, emphasized the need for security at major events. He said the most important thing was to guarantee safety for all fans. He wanted everyone who came to the games to have a good time. But behind that public confidence, a very different reality was emerging. Reports indicated that FIFA was privately alarmed by the situation. So alarmed, in fact, that FIFA's president was reportedly considering making a personal request, asking for a temporary suspension of immigration enforcement operations across the country for the duration of the tournament. Think about what that means. The president of world football, the man who had stood in press conferences and told the world that everything was under control, was privately contemplating going cap in hand to ask that a country's enforcement operations be paused so that his tournament could function safely. That is not the posture of an organization in control of its event. That is the posture of an organization that has realized, too late, the depth of the crisis it is navigating. And the crisis was not only inside the stadium walls. In communities across America's World Cup host cities, in Atlanta, in Miami, in Kansas City, in Los Angeles, local organizations and community groups were issuing the same warning. The presence of enforcement operations near stadiums, near fan zones, near the public spaces where millions of visitors would gather to watch matches was deterring people from coming. Not just international fans, American residents, people who lived and worked in those cities, who would ordinarily have been part of the local color and noise that makes a World Cup atmosphere what it is. A Haitian man named Emile, living in Ohio, had been following his Haitian team's journey to the 2026 World Cup with a pride that was almost impossible to describe. Haiti, in a World Cup for the first time in 50 years, his team, his flag, a once-in-a-lifetime moment for a nation that had endured more than most. Haiti's opening match against Scotland was scheduled at Gillette Stadium in Massachusetts, one of the states with the largest Haitian diaspora community in America. Tens of thousands of Haitians lived within driving distance of that ground. The atmosphere, under any other circumstances, could have been extraordinary. But Emile told journalists simply that he was afraid to go. Not afraid of the football, afraid of what might happen on the way there and on the way back, afraid of what it might mean for his family if something went wrong. He would watch from home. He was not alone. Advocacy groups across the Haitian community in Massachusetts reported that fear was the dominant emotion surrounding a match that should have been a celebration. Immigration advocates gathered outside FIFA's offices in Florida to demand that enforcement be kept entirely away from World Cup events, a simple demand, an urgent one. And it is at this point in the story that something needs to be said clearly because it matters deeply to understand what was really happening.
The people who were afraid were not people trying to evade anything. They were football fans. They were workers who had served at that stadium for years. They were American residents with families, with jobs, with decades of community life behind them. And the prospect of attending a football match, something that should feel like joy, had been transformed, for many of them, into something that felt like a risk. That transformation is perhaps the saddest and most significant thing that had happened to the 2026 World Cup. Not the empty seats, though there were many, Not the falling resale prices, though they were dramatic, but the fact that a football match had become, for a meaningful number of people, a place they were afraid to go. Meanwhile, the workers' strike threat at SoFi Stadium had created an operational crisis that FIFA could not afford to ignore. 8 World Cup matches were scheduled at that venue, including the United States men's national team's home opener on June 12th, one of the most anticipated matches of the entire tournament on American soil. And the people responsible for making it function were 96% in favor of walking out. Negotiations continued days before the opening match, right up to the wire. The union's position remained firm. Formal guarantees about the absence of enforcement operations inside the stadium or the workers would not come in. FIFA's position remained carefully vague, expressions of commitment to the safety of all fans and workers, language about respecting all applicable laws, statements that gave just enough room for interpretation to keep negotiations alive without delivering the clear, unconditional commitment the workers were asking for. For football supporters watching this unfold from Europe, from South America, from Africa, supporters who had been following the story of this tournament with a mixture of fascination and dismay, the SoFi situation felt like a symbol of something much larger. The 2026 World Cup had been presented as football's gift to the world, the biggest, the boldest, the most ambitious tournament ever staged. And now the people cooking the food in its most glamorous stadium were voting whether it was safe enough to come to work. There is a version of this story that ends well. Negotiations eventually produce an agreement, the workers walk in, the matches happen, the football is played, and the specific immediate crisis resolves itself in the way that crises at major events usually do, through compromise and pragmatism and the overwhelming desire of everyone involved for the show to go on. But the deeper crisis, the one that sent 17,000 fans to the refund button, that left a Haitian man in Ohio watching his country's historic World Cup debut on a screen rather than in the stands 40 minutes from where he lived, that put 2,000 stadium workers in the position of choosing between their jobs and their safety, that crisis does not resolve itself through a last-minute contract agreement. It resolves itself through something much harder and much slower, through an honest reckoning with what this tournament was and what it had become, through a recognition that the World Cup is not simply a product to be delivered, it is an experience to be shared. And the people it needs most, the fans in the stands, the workers behind the counters, the communities that open their doors, they need to feel not just permitted, but genuinely, unconditionally welcome. FIFA's president had told a room full of African journalists that everyone would be welcome at the 2026 World Cup, that there was a lot of misconception out there, that the world needed occasions of unity. He was right about the last part. The world does need occasions of unity. That is exactly what the World Cup has always been at its best. That is why people save for years to be there. Why a man in Ohio follows a team from a country that has endured every hardship imaginable, with a pride so deep it sits in the chest like something permanent. The game deserves better than this, and somewhere in these stadiums, when the football is played and the goals go in and the crowds that did come rise to their feet, you can still feel what this tournament was supposed to be. The question that will echo long after the final whistle is this: was it enough? For the workers who were afraid? For the fans who stayed home? For the communities that prepared for a celebration and found themselves navigating something far more complicated instead? Was it enough?